inviting me this morning. This is hopefully going to be an exciting project for us all going forward. I just wanted to start with this. We're actually in the process of redesigning some of our billboards, so I'm not sure if you've seen them around, but we have found this really striking image, and Craig McKenzie has offered for us to use it for free, which is really nice. So we're just trying to figure out all the words and everything around it at the moment, but I thought I'd showcase the image to you and see what you think. So this is me. So I've been the coordinator for the Songbird Project for nearly 3 years. As a part-time role, I also work for Auckland Council, and I sit on 2 community steering groups there. So back in 22, we decided to go through a bit of a strategy review. And these were our 4 main goals that we wanted to focus on and align all of our work back to. So, of course, the pests, we want to significantly reduce them, but we also realised that enhancing and protecting habitats is really important, increasing community engagement and organisation, and to also ensure that our organisation is sustainable, which is a pretty big deal with all the budget cuts. But this is really our bread and butter. So we hold these track handout events. We can target different neighbourhoods, different streets. We like to do it around significant parks or bush areas, and just to get people to trap in their backyards to complement what's already happening in some of the public spaces. And you can see where we started, 2017. It took a little bit to get going, but we started to really get some big numbers of traps out there. Can you see that all right? Yeah. So you can see in 2019 we really hit the ground running. We ended up giving up 820 traps that year. Unfortunately, COVID sort of slowed us down a bit, and now we're starting to see where we're just flooding the market basically. So our trap handouts have slowed down a little bit. And also part of our strategy is that we realise we're not an island, and we're always going to get re-invasion into our project zone. We are bordered by 3 passes of water, but it's not enough. Of course, things can pass through different neighbourhoods. So we decided to expand our program from the original project zone, which was Oraki to Glendowie, and now we've included a lot more areas, and so hopefully with some of your help we'll be starting to target some of this area down in Ellerslie as well. So actually this map, we've even started to come up here a little bit more as well into Panmure. So you can see when we started to expand our program, this is actually a map of all the traps. So it's pretty impressive. We've got over 2,000 traps out there now, and you can see where we expanded when we started to go into Remuera, Meadowbank, St John's, that sort of area. We are part of the Eastern Bays Trapping Network, which is a group that I've sort of been pulling together. So we've got the Eastern Bays Songbird Project, but we also have a few other trapping groups in our area that have been working on the parks, as I mentioned. So we've got some pretty impressive numbers here from our catches. So up to more than 7,000 rats, 1,700 possums in our area, over 4 hedgehogs, 3 stoats. So we don't get many stoats through our area. There is the idea that they may pass through our area and along the Tamaki River, because there has been some incursions out in Browns Island and Motutapu, and they think that they are probably coming up the Tamaki River or off Music Point, which would be obvious. So I know around Music Point they've started to do some more intensive trapping for stoats. But this just gives you an idea of our Eastern Bays Trapping Network. So the red dots are where the Eastern Bays Songbird Project operate. And then we've got some pretty heavy trapping going around Waitarua, Remuera Golf Club, we've got Kipper Bush, Churchill Park, and out on Tahuna Te Reo, which we are quite involved with all of these groups as well. So it's nice to be able to pull all that information together. So just when we talk about possums alone, we've had a significant impact on reducing the possums in our area. As I say, we've caught over 1,700 possums now, which people don't realise how many possums there are in urban areas. So especially around Remuera and Meadowbank, where you've got really old growth trees and big backyards, we're finding lots of pockets of possums. And around the cliff areas, so around Glendowie, when we first started, we took out hundreds of possums around Glendowie, and more recently around the Panmure Basin, I think we've taken about 50 possums out of there, and Hobson Bay around that coastline is up to about 30. So yeah, there are pockets around. But you can see where our project started in 2017, building up momentum, and you can see our project has made a significant impact on the possums compared to the rest of the network groups. So another thing that we wanted to focus on again is protecting habitats. So in 2019 we had a report written, which is on our website if you want to have a read through it. It's a really great document, and we looked at finding where all the existing corridors are, where the existing forest patches were, and how we could potentially enhance to link up some of those areas. And we have concentrated on two areas in the last couple of years. One is in Kohimarama Forest, which is quite a big forest plot in sort of on the border of Kohimarama and St Heliers. We've been in there restoring it, so it does have a permanent wetland, it's got a permanent stream that runs through it, and it actually goes all the way down to Kohimarama Beach. So a lot of weed problems in there, so we've been clearing that out. And the other area, which is quite void of any vegetation, is around Glendowie College, so we've been working with the students and creating some habitat in there, so it's been quite nice. Why do we do what we do? So basically we want to increase biodiversity, and if you haven't heard of this word, you probably would have, I'm sure, but it just means biological diversity, and when we talk about diversity we're talking about genetic, species and ecological, so different ecosystems. And when we talk about biodiversity at different scales, so we might say the biodiversity of our backyard, or of New Zealand, or of the planet. So different categories there. And it does matter, so we're actually in a biodiversity crisis at the moment, and this is quite alarming. We've actually reduced our species over the last 50 years by 69%, the latest figures. So it's having a huge impact. And so if we have a loss of diversity or loss of biodiversity, then our ecosystems collapse. And this simple diagram just shows you how circular everything is. So the plants rely on the sunlight, that feeds into the soil. We've got insects breaking up things, they end up to be food, and it just goes around and around. And if we break one of those links, then the whole ecosystem can fall down. Why is this happening? So the main 5 reasons why we've got massive biodiversity loss: pollution, of course, habitat loss, which is a really big one, over-exploitation, overfishing, hunting, farming, invasive species, which is where we come in, and climate change, of course. So I just put this in here for some context, because sometimes people just call everything native or non-native, but there is quite a big difference. So we talk about endemic species, and in New Zealand that's really, really important. We have a high number of endemic species. So endemic means not found anywhere else, they don't breed anywhere else, they're only in the country, so in New Zealand. We've got some examples there. Native, which loosely gets, everything gets called native, but they are actually found in other countries. So they've come here by themselves, but they also breed in other countries. and then introduce, so things that we've bought on purpose or introduced accidentally into New Zealand. And that is important because we have a really high number of endemic species. So 70% of our birds are endemic to New Zealand, 100% of our reptiles and bats, even 80% of our vascular plants are found nowhere else on the planet, except when they've been taken there. And you know, 84% of our fish species, not many people know that we have endemic fish species. We think about trout or salmon, which are actually protected and licensed, but they are introduced. So we have many, many different species of fish. And again, 80% of our insects found nowhere else. So really high numbers. We talked about habitat loss, so you might have seen this diagram before. Before humans came to New Zealand, we were largely forested, and it was just sort of these higher alpine areas that would have been tufted grasses and bare rock. And then as we came to New Zealand, populated it, of course we needed room for our farms and factories and horticulture, and so we've reduced that habitat right back. And so we're now sitting at about 20-25%, and a lot of that 25% is actually our national, our regional and national parks. These are our common predators that we have in New Zealand. So possums were introduced for the fur trade. Actually got one here. If you've never felt a possum fur before, passed around. It's an amazing fur, and you know, when they were introduced, we largely thought that they were just ate vegetation. But about 30 years ago, a scientist was studying them and found that they do go into birds' nests and rob the eggs, and they also will take baby chicks as well. So there's been a lot of their life up in the tree canopy. They have a really big impact on our birds. They can also destroy forests, so they're very voracious eaters. They can eat a lot in one night, and they can actually strip the canopy pretty bare. So things like our rata trees are really suffering from possum damage, and it just takes out that canopy and the plant can no longer survive. We've got the stoats and weasels and ferrets, of course, were introduced again for rabbit control. But they don't now prey on rabbits, unfortunately. They're very, they have a very strong sense of smell, and they can smell a baby bird or a chick, and they can of course climb up into the trees. Not many people know that stoats, weasels and ferrets, they will actually, the male will impregnate the female babies before they leave the hutch. So they've got this continual breeding going on. And so there was an incursion on Mosatapu, and the way that they caught the last one was they had a scent of a baby female, and that attracted the male into the trap. So thinking about different ways that we can trap things. Mice are a really big problem, especially for seabirds. So seabirds are burrowers. They go into a burrow, and the parents often are at sea for long periods of time getting food, and will leave the baby chicks alone, and the mice can come in big numbers, and the bird doesn't have any defence. Hedgehogs, this is a funny one. Not many people know that hedgehogs are a problem in New Zealand. They are cute, and we did introduce them just so we can watch them eating the slugs and snails in our gardens, but we do know now that they do eat a lot of insects, a lot of weta. They do eat our native lizards, so a lot of lizards, but they also are a really big problem for our shorebirds, which have their nests on the ground, of course. So at night time the hedgehog will come along and rob the nest and disturb the nest, and sometimes the parents of that nest will abandon it. We've also got our furry friends, of course. We've all got cats and dogs, I'm sure. Cats are a really hot topic at the moment, and I think Gareth Morgan, you know, he's got that conversation going quite a few years ago now, but you know, people are starting to think about the impacts of cats. And I sort of did a calculation for the Ōrākei local board area, and if we went on some of the studies in the density of urban cats, we've got about 17,000 urban cats in our area, and that's just the cats that are owned, so we know that there's unknown populations of cats around. So you might think that your cat doesn't do much damage, but it's the bigger picture, because we do know that cats hunt for fun. And a few years ago a study was done in the central North Island. They were finding bats that were dead, and they put some cameras up and they filmed one cat over a week and taken out 100 bats. So every night it was just going up and swiping them as they came out of their hole. So they can do a lot of damage, and it's definitely a conversation that's moving forward at the moment. Places in Australia, they've had cat curfews that you have to keep your cat inside, and that's because it's having a massive impact on their mammals. Dogs can be a problem, of course, when we hear about kiwis dying up north. You know, it's usually a dog that's gone missing and it's spent a few nights out in the bush. And kiwi, unfortunately, don't have a breastplate, so as soon as the dog grabs them, they die. They have no defence. And of course, we've all seen the dogs running around the beach chasing the seabirds, which sounds like a fun thing to do. But actually it changes their behaviour, and they're there to feed and to socialise and to mate, and if we've got too many dogs running around their habitat, then that changes their behaviour. Now, one of our main target species, of course, is the rat. So we've got two main species of rats in New Zealand: the ship rat, which is more common, a little bit smaller. It spends a lot of time up in the canopy, and so it is a problem for the birds. So it will get into the nest, take the eggs, take the baby chicks, and also scare away the parents, so they abandon the nest. So it's taking that whole life cycle out of some of our bird species. And then we've got Norway rat, which is a bit larger, and they tend to hang around waterways. So they can be quite big. So if you hear about a big rat, it's probably a Norway rat. Now this next image is not very pleasant, but the problem is that rats breed very, very fast. So we can expect a population of more than 40,000 rats if we let two rats breed and their kids breed and breed and breed. So it's quite horrific, and we've probably all seen those images in Australia and the States a few years ago where they had drought conditions and they were opening up barns and thousands and millions of rats were running out, so it can end up like that. So our birds are really important. As I mentioned, we've got really high levels of endemic species. They've evolved without predators. Does anyone know what our only natural predator would have been?
The hawk, that great big.
Yeah, so all avian predators. So we had the Haast eagle and other big eagles. So they didn't have to fly. All they had to do was scurry and hide under a log or in a tree stump. So a lot of our birds don't fly. Kiwi actually have small, tiny little wings, but they've never evolved to fly. And we have one of the biggest parrots in the world that doesn't even fly. So the kakapo, it's pretty silly, really. And you know, they have this really weird behaviour. So the kakapo is very tuned to its environment. When we have mast years, you might have heard that term, where the rimu or the beech trees have a climatic conditions that allows it to grow lots and lots of seeds and berries. That will actually trigger the kakapo to start breeding, and so it does this big boom. It makes its nest, and then to advertise it does these big booming noises to attract in the females. So really strange behaviour. Maintaining balance. So many of our birds are insect eaters. We often think of tuis as just nectar eaters, but they do switch their prey throughout the year depending on what's available food for them. And our little waxeye here is a really good feeder in your garden for all those insects. wiping out all the mealybugs and aphids and things that come through the winter. And also important role for pollination, of course. So most of our smaller flowered plants will have insect pollinators, or some are lizard pollinators. But there's about 10% of our plants that just simply wouldn't exist if we didn't have the birds to pollinate them. So anything with a really showy red or yellow flower, and they're often in a tubular form, that means that they need the birds to come in and drink the pollen, and in doing that they'll get the pollen on their face and cross-pollinate those plants. We have really specialised plants. This is a mistletoe. We have about 5 species of mistletoe in New Zealand, and it actually takes the bellbird or the tui, they have to twist it open to get the nectar. So it's very specialised and just wouldn't exist if we didn't have those birds there. Also really important seed dispersers. Kiruru is a really important seed disperser for the larger seeds. It's got a tereri berry in its mouth there. They have a very small head, but they've got actually the biggest gape or the biggest mouth out of all of our birds. So really important for some of those species. And again, the wax eye is quite important disperser for the smaller seeds. But you might think that, oh, the seed just drops to the ground and it will start growing, which is the case in some plants, but some plants will need the seed to go through the gut of the bird, and that allows the outside of the seed to be broken down, and that progresses it on to start to germinate. So again, we need those birds for those seed dispersers. What can we do? Lots we can do. We can monitor for pests, so we have a pest monitoring program which we're just about to do next week. We run this twice a year, where we have 11 permanent monitoring lines around the neighbourhood, and we can see over time if we're making a difference or not. And we also do this, and people can do this in their backyards, and we do this with a lot of schools as well. It's a fun thing to do. We use these tracking tunnels, and the cards are inked, so the critter runs through the tunnel and leaves its footprints behind, and we can tell what's around.
Can you pick what animal it is?
Yeah, so this is a rat up the top here. This is a mice, and then we've got hedgehogs, which have got quite a distinctive footprint.
Looks like a child's restaurant.
And then this one actually is a good one. That's actually weta.
Oh.
So we can also see when we've got weta on. And weta are really good indicator species, so when we know we've got lots of weta around, we don't have a lot of predators around, which is great. And the same with kiruru. So kiruru and weta are what we call indicator species. So we can trap for pests. We give out these traps for free. As I mentioned, we have the trailer, which you'll see outside. The men's shed make up these boxes for us, and then the trap lives inside. And then we sign people up to the program, and then they can report back on their catches, which is really nice to see on a landscape scale where the catches are happening. And this changes over time, of course. I think this was just from February this year. The other thing that we can do is help to create and enhance habitat. So, getting out and doing some planting, and I think you've been all involved with different planting events. We get the schools involved, of course. And if you've got a garden, it's nice to look at what plants that you could plant that will help to encourage habitat for the birds or food for the birds. Now, I mentioned we do have 80% of our vascular plants are endemic to New Zealand, so we've got 2,500 species to choose from. People often think, oh, flax and a cabbage tree, but there's so much more than that, and there's some really great examples out at the botanical gardens if you're ever thinking of what to put in your garden. And then there's what we call eco-source. So there's different ecological regions for plants. So you wouldn't plant a beech tree in an Auckland garden, for example. So another thing that we can do is remove pest plants. So this has become a really big problem, and Auckland is classified as the weediest city in the world. I think we sit closely with Hawaii, which is also very weedy. And the reason why we're really weedy is because of our climate. We've got a very warm, moist, sort of humid environment, and a lot of these plants love that. They thrive in it. So we get lots of introduced plants every year, and only about 10% of those will become established in the wild. Some of them won't propagate in New Zealand, so they're fine, but the 10% we just get out of control. And you can see how many, we've got over 24,000 non-native species that have been introduced. And a lot of the weed problems come from people's gardens, unfortunately, that they've got these beautiful plants, and they often are there because they're beautiful, but then they spread into reserves, or people dump some waste over the fence, and then they start growing from that. So, you know, it really devastates the forest that we've got left. A lot of vines will smother the canopy. A lot of ground covers will stop seedlings from growing. So it is a really big problem. The other thing that you can do is get involved with our bird counts. So we have bird counts twice a year. We've just finished our last campaign, so we usually run it in May and October. It's really easy. You just get out into your backyard and you can do it all through your phone. And it's a good way of seeing what sort of birds are in our neighbourhood, and if pest birds or native endemic birds are up or down. We had a PhD student, Rosie Geronimo. She did her PhD in our area because we did have a lot of trapping going on, and she wanted to see how successful nesting was. So she followed, I think she had 120 nests in the end that she followed. So it was a pretty good success rate. I need to actually update this, but most common, some of the things that came out of her study was, really importantly, that if people had more native or endemic trees in their backyard, then they tended to have more native or endemic birds. If they just had introduced trees in their backyards, they would just have blackbirds and thrushes and some of the other ones. So, you know, it did actually put some justification into making sure that you've got good habitat and food for the birds. There was lots of different species that she followed, but the most common ones were bird, pūwaka waka, white-sides and tuis. So it was really nice to have that study done. Oh, and actually we picked up a couple of interesting things. So we found out that kiruru were nesting in our area, which is quite unusual for an urban environment. I don't know if you've ever seen a kiruru nest, but it's basically just a thin layer of sticks. It's a bit of a haphazard nest, but they've fledged. They've been breeding there for a couple of years now, so it's quite nice to see. And the other thing is we picked up a bellbird. So the photo is a little bit blurry, but it's been confirmed by quite a few ecologists that yes, it is a bellbird. So that was nice to see in our area, because they have basically been extinct from our area for probably 100 years, and we get the odd one passing through, but more and more that we are trapping, we're seeing a few more coming through. Yeah, we introduced some we'll take some tuis to the South Island and swap them.
You can have some of the blackbirds from our place. They mess the bark up.
They certainly do.
Whereabouts was the bellbird?
It was around Waitarua Reserve actually, but we have had them turn up in St Heliers and also around Tahuna Terea, so they are around. And that's really it from me. Sorry, I sped through that really fast. But you know, these are our sponsors, so it's nice. We get a lot of sponsorship from Aaron Foss's been amazing getting our billboards up, and we get the 2 local boards fund us, and we also have really good support from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, which they own a lot of land in Ōrākei, so we're helping them out with their trapping, and of course the men's shed and a few other people there. So that's it. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? And I'm going to kick this off with one. WWF with their findings, and how do they know?
Yeah,
Where do they get that information?
yeah. So it was a big study, and I think their latest report is 2022. So it is available on their website, so you can read through that.
So it was their study, but where did they get the raw information from? Because to be able to come up with the number of native species.
So they looked at a number of biodiversity hotspots. So there's a few named around the world. New Zealand is actually one of them. You've got places around the Amazon. There's a number of different habitats and places that they measure that from. So it's known species, so of course there's species that we haven't discovered yet. So I mean that doesn't take that into account, but just seeing.
So they're giving the information from university studies within here, or they're coming out and counting them on?
No, so it's all collation of studies that have been done, so it's drawing together all of that.
I have a sort of a basic question. You put all these traps out there, so they're all scattered around, and you catch stuff in them. How do you then clean them out? Is it the council comes in and does that, or do you do that? Or?
A lot of people do it themselves, so it's not hard to do. These are the traps that we use, so the boxes. The boxes really just stop from getting birds and cats and dogs in there, and it directs the rodent into the trap. This isn't a real rat, but they're just snap traps that we generally use, which are, we've gone through a number of different models of traps over the years, but these are by far the best to use for everyday people. So easy to set. When you catch the rat, you just pull it out and it just goes into your collectible rubbish bin. Yep, or if you've got a big...
So what about possums though?
Possums,
Do they save their skin?
No.
We had possums in our roost some years ago. Interesting catching those.
Yeah, so we
And getting rid of them.
use kill traps. So we use mainly these, which are called flipping timmies. They attach to a tree or a fence. We're baited with an apple, so not any, they're not going to be trapping cats or dogs or anything like that. The possum puts its head up and it breaks their neck. And so clearing them out is just releasing them from the trap. Again, they just go into the collectible rubbish. Yeah, and if it's on a park, some parks will have a dedicated bin where a contractor will come and clear them, but it depends. And often if you're in a big park area, you can just fling them into the bush and they break down pretty quickly. And hopefully a dog doesn't pick them up. But yeah, collectible rubbish is the best way to go.
You look green pops.
Yeah.
Genetic engineering against possums. Our major problem is particularly up north with the forest up there that we're losing. So how's science going?
Yeah, so Predator Free 2050 has been the major drive, and they have put some quite substantial money into companies like Zip that are doing a lot of testing with traps and some genetics. They're not there yet. There's going to be coming out on the market a specific rat poison that will be targeted just for rats, so that's quite exciting. But we haven't really got anywhere with the genetics yet. No, that will be a long way off, I think.